I always thought family meant everything. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, I was taught that blood was thicker than water, that you always put family first, no matter what. My name is Chen, and for 28 years of my life, I lived by that principle. It nearly destroyed me. My parents, David and Linda Chen, were immigrants from Taiwan who built their American dream through a small but successful restaurant chain. They worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week, and expected the same dedication from their children. My older brother Michael was the golden child, the pre-med student who would become a doctor and bring honor to the family name. My younger sister Emma was the baby protected and coddled because she was supposedly fragile and artistic. Then there was me, the middle child, the dependable one, the one who would sacrifice anything for the family's well-being. From the age of 12, I was working in the restaurants after school, during weekends, and throughout every summer vacation. While other kids were playing sports or hanging out with friends, I was learning how to manage inventory, handle customer complaints, and balance cash registers. My parents justified this by saying I was learning valuable life skills and that the business would someday be mine. They painted a picture of a family legacy that I would inherit, making me feel special and chosen. What they didn't tell me was that every penny I earned was going directly into Michael's medical school fund and Emma's private art classes. When I graduated high school with a 3.8 GPA and got accepted to several good colleges, my parents sat me down for what they called a family meeting. My father, his weathered hands folded on the kitchen table, looked at me with those serious eyes that always made me feel like I was in trouble. "Sarah," he said in his accented English, "we need to talk about your future. College is very expensive, and Michael's medical school costs are higher than we expected. We think it would be better if you postponed college for a few years and helped run the restaurants full time. Once Michael graduates and starts earning money as a doctor, then you can go to college." My mother nodded enthusiastically. "Think about it, Sarah. You already know the business so well. You're much better at it than Michael ever was. And Emma, she's not suited for this kind of work. She's too sensitive. But you're strong. You can handle it." I remember sitting there feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. All my friends were preparing for their freshman year of college, buying dorm supplies and choosing majors. I had already picked out my courses for a business degree, imagining how I could use my education to expand the family business properly. But I didn't argue. I nodded and said, "Of course, I understand. Family comes first." That phrase would become my mantra for the next decade of my life. The years that followed blurred together in a haze of 14-hour workdays, missed opportunities, and constant exhaustion. I managed 3 restaurant locations, handled all the hiring and firing, dealt with suppliers, and essentially ran the entire operation while my parents focused on strategic planning, which mostly involved long conversations in Mandarin that excluded me and frequent trips back to Taiwan to visit relatives. Michael sailed through medical school without ever working a single shift in the restaurants. When he graduated, he moved to California for his residency, claiming he needed to find himself and that working in the family business would be limiting his potential. My parents were proud of his independence and ambition. Emma, meanwhile, attended an expensive private art school in New York City. Her tuition, room and board, and living expenses all came from the restaurant profits that I was generating. She would call home occasionally to complain about how hard her classes were or how the other students didn't understand her vision. My parents would coo sympathetically and send her additional money for art supplies or a weekend trip with friends. During this time, I lived in a small apartment above one of the restaurants, paying rent to my own parents. I had no social life, no romantic relationships, and no time for hobbies or personal interests. When friends from high school would visit town and invite me out, I would have to decline because I was always working. Gradually, they stopped calling. My parents assured me that my sacrifices were temporary and meaningful. Just a few more years became their constant refrain. Once the business is more stable, once Michael is established, once Emma graduates, then you can focus on yourself. I believed them because I wanted to believe them. I had invested so much of my youth and energy into this promise that admitting it might be false felt impossible. I convinced myself that I was building something important, that my hard work would eventually pay off, that my family truly appreciated what I was doing for them. The first crack in my faith came during Emma's senior year art show. I had worked double shifts for 3 weeks to cover the cost of her flights home and the expensive framing for her pieces. I was exhausted but excited to finally see what my sister had been creating with all the money and support we had given her. The art show was in a trendy gallery downtown, filled with Emma's classmates and their families. Emma looked radiant in a designer dress that cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. When I arrived, still wearing my restaurant uniform because I had come straight from work, she seemed embarrassed to introduce me to her friends. "This is my sister Sarah," she would say vaguely before quickly changing the subject or steering the conversation elsewhere. But the real shock came when I overheard her talking to a group of her art school friends. They were discussing their post-graduation plans, and one of them asked Emma about her family's business. "Oh, that," Emma laughed, a sound that cut through me like glass. "That's just my parents' little restaurant thing. Sarah runs it because she's not really college material, you know? She's more of a hands-on person. I could never do that kind of work. It's so beneath me. I'm going to be a real artist, not stuck flipping burgers in some strip mall." Her friends laughed along, making comments about how lucky she was to have a sister who was willing to do that kind of work so she could pursue her real calling. I stood there frozen, feeling like I had been slapped. This was how my sister saw me. This was how she described my years of sacrifice. Not as someone who was building a family legacy or making meaningful contributions, but as someone who was not college material and doing work that was beneath her. I left the art show early and drove around for hours, crying in my car in empty parking lots. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Emma's words and the dismissive laughter of her friends. For the first time, I began to question whether my family really saw me as a valuable partner in our shared enterprise or just as convenient free labor. The next morning, I tried to talk to my parents about what I had heard. I expected them to be as hurt and shocked as I was, to defend me and maybe have a conversation with Emma about respect and gratitude. Instead, my mother waved her hand dismissively. "Emma is young," she said. "She doesn't understand business yet. She's an artist, Sarah. Artists think differently. You shouldn't take it personally." My father nodded. "Emma will learn to appreciate what you do when she's older. Right now, she needs to focus on her art. That's her job. Your job is to take care of the restaurants." That's when I realized something that chilled me to the bone. My parents agreed with Emma's assessment. They didn't see my work as valuable or important. They saw it as my natural role, my appropriate place in the family hierarchy. They had never intended for me to inherit the business in any meaningful way. I was the family workhorse, and that's all I would ever be. But I still wasn't ready to act on this realization. The patterns of a lifetime don't break easily, and I had built my entire identity around being the reliable daughter, the one who put family first. I pushed down my doubts and continued working, telling myself that things would change, that my family would eventually recognize my contributions. The breaking point came 2 years later during what should have been a moment of celebration. After 10 years of my management, the restaurants were more successful than they had ever been. We had expanded to 5 locations, revenue had tripled, and we had been featured in several local magazines as a family business success story. Michael had finished his residency and landed a lucrative position at a hospital in Los Angeles. Emma had graduated from art school and was working as a freelance graphic designer in Brooklyn, though she was still receiving monthly checks from my parents to supplement her income. Both of them had come home for Christmas, the first time in 2 years that our entire family had been together. On Christmas Eve, my parents announced that they wanted to have a family business meeting to discuss the future of the restaurants. I was excited, thinking this might finally be the moment when they officially recognized my role and started planning for my leadership of the company. We gathered in the living room of my parents' house, the same room where they had asked me to postpone college a decade earlier. My father opened a folder full of legal documents and spread them across the coffee table. "We've been thinking about succession planning," he began, "and we've decided it's time to make some changes to ensure the business continues to thrive for future generations." My heart raced with anticipation. This was it. This was the moment when my years of sacrifice would be acknowledged and rewarded. "We're restructuring the business as a family trust," my father continued. "Michael and Emma will each receive 35% ownership, and Sarah will receive 30%. will retain ownership of the remaining shares until we retire. I stared at the documents, trying to process what I was hearing. Wait, I said slowly. Michael gets 35%? But he's never worked in the restaurants. He doesn't know anything about the business. My mother smiled at me condescendingly. Michael is a doctor, Sarah. He has excellent business sense and leadership skills. We think his perspective will be valuable as the business grows. And Emma gets 35% too? I asked, my voice getting higher. She just told a room full of people that this work is beneath her. Emma rolled her eyes. God, Sarah, you're so dramatic. I didn't mean it like that. Besides, I am part of this family, aren't I? Just because I chose a different career path doesn't mean I don't deserve my share of the family wealth. But I've been running these restaurants for 10 years, I said, looking around the room desperately. I built this success. I sacrificed college, relationships, my entire 20s to make this work. How is it fair that I get less than people who've never contributed anything? My father's expression hardened. Sarah, you've been well compensated for your work. You've had a job, a place to live, and a guaranteed income for 10 years. Not everyone gets that kind of security. And frankly, your attitude right now is very disappointing. This is not about fairness. This is about family. Family. I stood up, the documents scattering to the floor. Family is what I've been giving you for 10 years. Family is what I sacrificed my entire youth for. And now you're telling me that my contributions are worth less than Michael's medical degree and Emma's art school education. Michael finally spoke up, his voice calm and clinical. Sarah, I think you're overreacting. 30% is still a significant stake. And let's be honest, you never would have had the opportunity to learn business management without the restaurants. Mom and Dad gave you a chance when you couldn't get into a good college. That lie hit me like a physical blow. Couldn't get into a good college? I whispered. I got accepted to 3 different universities. I gave up college because you asked me to help the family. My parents exchanged glances, and I saw something in their eyes that made my blood run cold. They had rewritten history in their minds. They genuinely believed that I had fallen into restaurant management because I wasn't capable of anything else, not because I had made a sacrifice for the family's benefit. Sarah, my mother said gently, as if she were talking to a child having a tantrum. You're getting upset over nothing. This arrangement is very generous. You'll never have to worry about money or finding another job. Isn't that what you want? I looked around the room at these people who shared my DNA, who I had devoted my entire adult life to supporting and protecting, and I realized that they didn't know me at all. They had never seen me as a person with dreams, ambitions, or potential beyond my usefulness to them. They had created a narrative in which I was the lucky beneficiary of their generosity, rather than the primary architect of their success. No, I said quietly, that's not what I want. For the first time in my life, I walked out of a family meeting. I spent that night in my apartment, staring at the ceiling and finally allowing myself to face the truth I had been avoiding for years. My family didn't love me the way I loved them. They valued me for what I could do for them, not for who I was. Every major decision they had made about my life had been based on what would benefit them most, not what would help me grow or thrive. The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I called in sick to work. Instead of going to the restaurants, I went to the public library and spent hours researching business law, employment rights, and franchise opportunities. I learned about non-compete clauses, partnership agreements, and what it meant to be an at-will employee versus a business owner. What I discovered was both liberating and terrifying. I had been working as an employee for 10 years, not as a partner. Despite all the talk about family business and inheritance, I had no legal rights to the company I had built. I could be fired at any time, and I would have no claim to the assets or intellectual property I had helped create. But I also learned that my skills, experience, and industry knowledge were valuable. I had spent a decade learning every aspect of restaurant management, from supply chain logistics to customer service systems. I knew how to read financial statements, manage staff, negotiate with vendors, and market to local communities. These were real, transferable skills that could serve me anywhere. For the first time in years, I started imagining a different future for myself. The confrontation came 3 days later when my parents called an emergency family meeting to discuss my unprofessional behavior and disrespectful attitude. They had spoken to Michael and Emma, who were both concerned about my emotional instability and thought I might need professional help to deal with my unrealistic expectations. I arrived at that meeting with a folder of my own, containing research I had done about my legal rights, copies of financial records showing my contributions to the business, and a letter I had spent 2 days writing and rewriting. "Before you say anything," I told them, standing near the door instead of taking my usual seat at the table, "I want you to know that I've made a decision. I'm resigning from my position at the restaurants effective in 2 weeks." The room erupted in shocked protests, but I held up my hand to silence them. "I've also consulted with an employment attorney," I continued, "and I'll be filing for unpaid overtime compensation for the last 10 years. According to federal labor law, family members who work in family businesses are still entitled to proper compensation if they're functioning as employees rather than true partners." My father's face turned red. "You can't be serious. After everything we've done for you, you're going to sue your own family." "I'm not suing anyone," I replied calmly. "I'm simply claiming the wages I'm legally entitled to. If you had treated me as a true partner instead of as free labor, this wouldn't be necessary." Emma scoffed. "This is so typical of you, Sarah. Always playing the victim, always acting like the world owes you something." I turned to look at my sister, this person I had worked 60-hour weeks to support, whose art school education I had funded with my sweat and exhaustion. "Emma," I said, "in the last 5 years, how much money have you earned from your art?" She flushed. "That's not the point. Art takes time to develop. Commercial success isn't the only measure of value." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "So why doesn't that same logic apply to my work? Why is my contribution measured only by its commercial value to the family, while yours is protected and subsidized regardless of its profitability?" She didn't have an answer for that. My mother tried a different approach, her voice taking on the wounded tone she used when she wanted me to feel guilty. "Sarah, I don't understand where this is coming from. We're a family. Families support each other. We've always supported each other." "Have we?" I asked. "Because when I wanted to go to college, the family needed me to work. When Michael wanted to go to medical school, the family found a way to pay for it. When Emma wanted to pursue art, the family made that possible too. But when I want to be fairly compensated for my work, or treated as an equal partner in the business I've run for 10 years, suddenly I'm being unreasonable and selfish." I opened my folder and pulled out a document I had prepared. This is a breakdown of the financial value I've contributed to this business over the last decade. It includes my unpaid overtime, the below-market salary I've accepted, and the additional value I've created through expansion and efficiency improvements. The total comes to just over $400,000. The number hung in the air like a bomb. $400,000, I repeated. That's what I've effectively given to this family over the last 10 years. That's more than Michael's entire medical school education. That's more than Emma's art school tuition, room and board, and post-graduation support combined. But somehow I'm the one who needs to be grateful for the opportunities I've been given. Michael tried to interrupt, but I wasn't finished. "I'm not asking for that money back," I said. "Consider it my contribution to the family. But I'm done making contributions that aren't recognized or valued. I'm done sacrificing my future for people who see my sacrifices as natural and expected rather than as gifts." I pulled out another document. "This is my formal resignation letter. I'll spend the next 2 weeks training whoever you want to replace me, and then I'll be leaving." "Leaving to do what?" my father demanded. "You think you can just start over at 28 with no college education and no other work experience? You think anyone else is going to give you the opportunities we've given you?" I smiled for the first time in months. "Dad, I've spent 10 years learning how to run a successful restaurant business. I know this industry inside and out. I have relationships with suppliers, experience with multiple locations, and a track record of consistent growth and profitability. You're right that I don't have a college degree, but I have something better. I have real, proven skills and the confidence that comes from knowing I built something valuable." The look of shock on his face told me that he had never considered this perspective. In his mind, I was completely dependent on the family business because I had nowhere else to go. It had never occurred to him that other employers might value the experience I had gained. Over the next 2 weeks, I trained my replacement while my family alternated between trying to guilt me into staying and threatening me with dire predictions about my future. Michael flew back from California to stage what he called an intervention, where he explained that I was having a delayed adolescent rebellion and needed therapy to deal with my resentment issues. Emma started a group text with extended family members, painting me as ungrateful and mentally unstable, seeking support for her narrative that I was betraying the family for selfish reasons. Several aunts and uncles called to lecture me about respect and family loyalty. My parents tried multiple approaches. They offered me a small raise, then threatened to cut me off completely, then promised to revisit the ownership structure, then warned me that I would destroy the family if I followed through with my plans. But something had fundamentally shifted inside me. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based on what I wanted and needed, rather than what other people expected from me. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. On my last day of work, I cleaned out my office and left detailed notes about ongoing projects and vendor relationships. My parents weren't speaking to me, but I could see the panic in their eyes as they realized how much institutional knowledge I was taking with me. 3 months later, I was managing a small restaurant group in the next county with a starting salary that was 30% higher than what I had been making with my family. My new boss, Maria Santos, was a second-generation Mexican-American entrepreneur who had built her business from a single food truck into a regional success story. During my job interview, she had looked at my resume and whistled softly. 10 years of multi-location management experience, and you're only 28. Someone was smart enough to give you real responsibility early. That's impressive. I didn't correct her assumption about who had been smart. I just smiled and said, I learned a lot. The first 6 months of my new life were a mixture of liberation and loneliness. I was learning what it felt like to be valued and respected in the workplace, to have my ideas listened to and implemented, to receive credit for my successes. But I was also dealing with the grief of losing my family because that's essentially what had happened. My parents had made it clear that my decision to leave was unforgivable, a betrayal that proved I had never truly been committed to the family. Michael sent me occasional texts suggesting that I should come to my senses and apologize. Emma blocked me on social media and told relatives that I was dead to her. The hardest part wasn't the anger or the dramatic pronouncements. It was the silence. After 28 years of daily contact with my family, of being constantly needed and relied upon, the absence of that connection felt like a physical amputation. I started therapy to deal with the complex emotions of my situation. My therapist, Dr. Rachel Martinez, helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a form of grief, but also a form of birth. I was mourning the loss of the family I had thought I had, while simultaneously discovering who I was when I wasn't defined by their needs and expectations. Your family trained you to see your value only in terms of your usefulness to them, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our sessions. Now you have to learn to see your inherent worth as a person separate from what you can do for others. This was harder than it sounded. I had spent so many years deriving my self-worth from being needed, from being the responsible one, from solving other people's problems, that I didn't know who I was when I was just living my own life. I started small. I joined a book club at the local library, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for. I took a pottery class on weekends, discovering that I had artistic abilities that had been completely dormant during my restaurant years. I adopted a rescue dog, a gentle golden retriever mix named Charlie, who became my first experience of loving and being loved without any complicated family dynamics. Slowly, I began to build a life that was truly mine. I made friends who knew me only as Sarah the restaurant manager, not Sarah the disappointing daughter, or Sarah the family workhorse. I started dating for the first time since high school, learning what it felt like to be with someone who appreciated my company rather than my labor. The most significant relationship I developed was with my mentor, Maria. She became a role model for what healthy family dynamics could look like. Maria had built her business while maintaining close relationships with her 3 daughters, all of whom worked in different fields but contributed to the family enterprise in ways that matched their interests and abilities. The difference, Maria told me one day as we reviewed quarterly reports, is that my daughters know they're always welcome in the business, but they also know they're free to leave. Love shouldn't be a prison, Sarah. If your family is only together because leaving would be too painful or too costly, that's not really love. That's just fear and obligation. Her words helped me understand why my family's reaction to my departure had been so extreme. They hadn't just lost an employee, they had lost the foundation of their entire system. Without me providing free labor and financial sacrifice, they would have to fundamentally restructure their lives and relationships. About 8 months after I left, I heard through mutual friends that the family restaurant business was struggling. Without my management, they had lost 2 major catering contracts, and one of the locations had been cited for health code violations. Michael had taken a leave of absence from his medical practice to try to help, but his lack of practical experience was showing. I felt a complex mixture of sadness and vindication when I heard this news. I was sad because I genuinely cared about the business I had helped build, and I knew that my parents had invested their life savings into those restaurants. But I was also vindicated because their struggles proved that my contributions had been more valuable than they had ever acknowledged. The call came on a Tuesday evening in November, almost exactly a year after I had walked out of that final family meeting. I was at home reading a book while Charlie dozed at my feet when my phone rang with my mother's number. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. "Hi, Mom." Sarah. Her voice sounded older, more fragile than I remembered. "How are you?" "I'm good," I said honestly. "How are you?" There was a long pause. We're having some difficulties with the restaurants. I was wondering if you might be willing to meet with us. To talk. I closed my book and looked out the window at the small apartment I had rented, the first place that had ever felt truly like home. "What kind of talk?" "We've been thinking about what you said. About fairness. About recognizing your contributions. We realize we may have made some mistakes." I felt a familiar pull, the old instinct to rush back and fix their problems, to sacrifice my own peace and stability for their needs. But this time I recognized the feeling and chose not to act on it. "Mom," I said gently, "I appreciate you calling, but I'm not interested in coming back to work for the family business." "Not to work for us," she said quickly. "As a partner. A real partner. We've talked to our lawyer about restructuring the ownership. We could give you 40%, maybe even 50%. It was the offer I had dreamed of hearing for 10 years. But now, sitting in my own apartment with my own dog and my own life, it felt like an echo from a different person's dreams. "I'm honored that you would consider that," I said. "But I'm happy where I am now. I'm building something different." My mother was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was small. "Do you hate us?" The question broke my heart a little because it revealed how little she understood about what had happened between us. "No, Mom. I don't hate you. I love you. But I love myself now too, and I can't go back to a situation where those two loves are in conflict." We talked for another 20 minutes, and it was the most honest conversation I had ever had with my mother. She apologized for not recognizing my sacrifices, for treating my contributions as expected rather than exceptional. She admitted that they had struggled to replace me, that they had underestimated how much skill and institutional knowledge I had developed. But she also couldn't understand why I wouldn't come back now that they were ready to treat me fairly. The concept that their previous treatment had changed me fundamentally, that I had grown beyond my old role and discovered new possibilities for my life, was difficult for her to grasp. I didn't expect her to understand completely. I just needed her to accept my choice. 2 years later, I was promoted to regional manager at Maria's company, overseeing 12 restaurant locations across 3 counties. I had also started taking business classes at the local community college, finally pursuing the education I had deferred so many years earlier. My personal life had flourished as well. I was in a serious relationship with David, a social worker who understood about complicated family dynamics and who valued my independence rather than feeling threatened by it. We had moved in together, and Charlie had enthusiastically accepted David as his second favorite human. I maintained occasional contact with my family, but on my own terms. I called my parents every few months to check in, and we exchanged holiday cards. Michael and I had tentatively reconnected after he sent me a long email acknowledging that he had benefited from my sacrifices without ever recognizing or appreciating them. Emma and I were still estranged, which was painful but necessary. She continued to view my departure as a personal betrayal rather than a healthy boundary, and I had learned that I couldn't force someone to respect my choices if they were determined to see me as a villain in their story. The most important relationship I had rebuilt was the one with myself. I had learned to trust my own judgment, to value my own needs, and to believe that I deserved to be treated with respect and consideration. I had discovered that I was creative, funny, and interesting when I wasn't exhausted and resentful all the time. I had also learned that there was a difference between being selfish and being self-caring. For years, my family had conflated the two, making me believe that any attention I paid to my own needs was a betrayal of my responsibilities to them. Now, I understood that self-care was actually a prerequisite for healthy relationships, not an obstacle to them. On the third anniversary of my departure from the family business, I received an unexpected package in the mail. It was from Emma, and it contained a small framed piece of her artwork, a watercolor painting of a bird breaking free from a cage. The note that came with it was brief. I still don't understand why you had to leave, but I'm starting to understand that maybe I never had to understand. I'm proud of what you've built for yourself. Love, Emma. I hung the painting in my office at work, where it served as a daily reminder of how far I had come and how much I had gained by having the courage to choose myself. Looking back, I realized that the most important thing I had learned wasn't about family dynamics or business management or even personal boundaries, though all of those lessons had been crucial. The most important thing I had learned was that love shouldn't require the sacrifice of your identity, your dreams, or your sense of self-worth. Real love, healthy love, wants you to grow and thrive, even if that growth takes you in unexpected directions. Real love celebrates your successes rather than feeling threatened by them. Real love doesn't keep score of sacrifices or demand payment for support. It had taken me 30 years to understand this, but now that I did, I could finally build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation and guilt. I thought about the scared, exhausted 28-year-old who had walked out of that family meeting 3 years earlier, convinced that she was destroying her life and betraying everyone who mattered to her. I wished I could tell her that she wasn't destroying anything important. She was just clearing space for something better to grow. Today, I wake up every morning in a life that I chose, surrounded by people who see and value the real me. I have work that challenges and fulfills me, relationships that nourish rather than drain me, and dreams that belong to me alone. I've learned that the most radical thing you can do sometimes is simply refuse to sacrifice your happiness for other people's comfort. And every day I'm grateful that I finally found the courage to choose myself.